Many times we hear the discussion that if I cannot see something, I cannot hear something, I cannot taste something, then I don't believe it exists. Effectively, they're saying the only thing that I will accept that exists is what I can sense directly. Anything outside of what I can sense directly, I don't believe exists. And in fact, they further go on to say, and they say, if we can't put it in a test tube, we can't test it, we can't subject it to special scientific conditions, then it is not true. Because the only sole basis of truth is what? Is science. So if this discussion about God, can we test God? Can we hear God? Can we see God? If this is outside of this, then therefore God does not exist, because God is not a scientific hypothesis that could be tested.
So we have two kinds of evidence, empirical and logical. You like to claim that empirical doesn't matter. So we only have logical, according to you, when it comes to God. Then we have two kinds of skepticism. Absolute knowledge, seeking absolute knowledge, in other words, or effective reasoning. You like to claim that we should only care about absolute knowledge. But with absolute knowledge, we can only know few things, like fundamental laws of logic and that we exist. Only these two things we can know with absolute certainty. So if your argument is we will only care for logical evidence and we will only care for absolute truth, then you just admitted by definition you don't have good reasons to believe in God. God is not fundamental in logic.
Is really science the only basis by which we determine truths of the universe and what we sense around? I'll give the example of the Mona Lisa. Now science will tell us, if it looks at the Mona Lisa, that painting, it will tell us the material of the canvas. It will tell us the material of the paint. It will tell us the reflection of light at a specific wavelength and specific energy. It will tell us a lot of detail about what's within the sense parameters of that painting. But science itself cannot determine that there was a man from the 15th or 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci, who painted Mona Lisa. That means that therefore, if we can't determine it by science, it doesn't mean therefore we don't believe that Leonardo da Vinci existed or that it was or that he painted Mona Lisa.
Science in Greek translates to episteme. What the word episteme reminds you? Epistemology. What epistemology means? Let's see the definition of epistemology. Epistemology comes from two Greek words. Episteme, science, και logos, the word of science. In other words, investigating the nature of knowledge. So what I'm trying to say is that episteme, science, is not just the strict meaning in a lab. We have the science of history, the science of human psychology, the science of the mind, the science of nature, natural sciences, in other words. So science, episteme, is not just the strict science of nature. So the true definition of science is a rigorous methodological investigation of reality. That is the ancient Greek definition. Now, I don't know how that happened in the West, I don't know. Science is a rigorous methodological investigation of the natural world. No, that is just natural sciences.
Similarly, if somebody was to say that I have a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather who I don't know where their grave is, I don't know where he lived, I don't have any DNA records of this individual, I don't have a birth certificate of this individual, we wouldn't say because this great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is outside of the experimental field that we didn't have one. And another example, Professor Steve Jones, he asked a question in his book, The Single Helix. Can we determine whether a mouse has consciousness? And he says no, because it's outside of the data that we can collate. But even more fundamentally, can we determine that human beings have consciousness? Because when we look and sense the issue of consciousness, if we take a very strictly empirical approach, what are we sensing? We may sense the brain, we may sense the neurons, we may sense action potentials, we may sense neurotransmitters that cross the synaptic cleft. Are we actually sensing consciousness per se directly? And just because that discussion of not being able to touch it, feel it, see it, or being able to recreate consciousness in a laboratory, in a computer program, doesn't therefore mean that consciousness doesn't exist.
Can we have a rigorous methodological investigation whether we had a grandmother? Certainly. So that is inside science. is outside maybe natural science in the strict sense of a lab. Can we investigate whether a mouse has consciousness? Yes, we can do that. So that is inside science. It's outside the strict lab kind of science. Okay. We have strong empirical evidence that consciousness exists. In fact, it's one of the few things we can say with absolute certainty exists because of our own consciousness. We have strong empirical evidence that we have grandparents, as we know that is the only way humans are born. We don't have strong empirical evidence that God exists because he decided to play hide and seek. Your own channel, Sharif, the Thought Adventure podcast, you say, one of atheists' best arguments, divine hiddenness. So you inadvertently admit that God is hiding in one form or another. He's not like consciousness, he's not like our grandparents. Then you said this.
Many times we hear the discussion that if I cannot see something, I cannot hear something, I cannot taste something, then I don't believe it exists. Effectively, they're saying the only thing that I will accept that exists is what I can sense directly. Anything outside of what I can sense directly, I don't believe exists.
Let's say I made the claim that there is a witch at the dark side of the moon. So what is the argument here? That unless we take a rocket and go to the dark side of the moon and check whether this witch exists, we should believe it then. Because it's outside of our investigative ability. No, we only believe things that we have good reasons to do so. Not believe everything until it's disproven. That's why I made my equation that solves all these questions you have, Sharif. Obviously, Sharif is a very intelligent, and I enjoy listening to him. Okay, so reasonable to believe equals level of claim plus level of conviction this claim demands divided by the evidence. So, what is the level of claim? How significant is this claim? For example, I have a dragon in my basement is more significant than I have a car in my basement. So I need more evidence to support that I have a dragon in my basement. The level of conviction this claim demands is how demanding is the claim. For example, asking people to give up their holiday is less demanding than asking people to give up their children. So if I was to convince someone to give up his holiday, I would have needed less evidence than if I was to convince him to give up his children. Isn't that right? So when we are to establish whether we are reasonable to believe in God, we need to take the level of claim, the level of conviction this claim demands, and divide it by the evidence. Evidence are empirical and logical. So if you reject empirical, you have the problem, because now you have less evidence. That's simple. So, Sharif, if the level of conviction you demand from societies is, let's dismantle democracy, let's take down human rights, and let's put half of human population in bags, your evidence cannot be whatever exists must have a cause. Understand now? Why is that? Because the level of conviction you demand doesn't meet the evidence you provide.
Today we're discussing the argument from Divine Hiddenness against the existence of God, or against theism, which is one of the most popular arguments against the existence of the theistic or God, or the God of monotheism.
But yeah,
so I'm just going to pull up the argument here, maybe a simple form of the argument that will get us started. So premise, conclusion. Premise 1, if God exists, there are no non-resistant non-believers. Premise 2, there are non-resistant non-believers. Conclusion, God does not exist. So it's a valid argument. The form is valid. If premise 1 and 2 are true, the conclusion follows. So take it away, guys. Whoever wants to start.
Sharif tweeted this argument that made me do the video. He says, coined atheist best argument, Divine Hiddenness, attempts to argue that if God exists, we should expect overwhelming evidence that would result in no disbelief. If then we don't have this and or disbelievers exist, then God doesn't exist.
Look, 1, life's a test, yeah? So the reason why it's not necessarily, these are possible answers. The reason why it's not as obvious is because it's a test. It's about whether somebody's going to be sincere. 2, it's soul building. It's a way of building your consciousness and your relationship with God. God doesn't want necessarily you to be just somebody who acknowledges the truth, but wants to submit to it. And maybe this is the best way to develop the idea of submission, because he has to test himself, test his ideas, and be sincere to it. 3, that the most number of people that will enter into submission of God are the ones who have to go through this process. So it has to be set up in a particular way in which people have to, rigorously test their ideas and come to this conclusion. And maybe that's what God wants. 4, actually, there are sufficient evidences and reasons for the existence of God, which are manifest and are clear cut and are open to every single individual. 5, anybody who does not have, correct belief because they are completely ignorant, they're jail, either because they live in the Amazon rainforest or because they've not heard the message of Islam correctly, then these people, or they've not heard Islam at all, then these people are completely forgiven and they're not going to be punished in hellfire. So there are all these possible answers to your contention. Yeah, I just don't see it as a contention. And remember, Schellenberg didn't argue this based upon is Islam true or not. He was arguing whether God exists or not.
And I responded, solve mine, Divine Hiddenness argument. Premise 1, Allah is just. Premise 2, Allah decides to hide. Premise 3, there is disbelief in goodwill. Premise 4, God condemns people based on disbelief. Conclusion, Allah is not just. Okay, no one can solve this argument. This argument conclusively disproves Allah. And he responded, lol, did you listen to the vid? But it doesn't seem like you did, and if you did, it didn't seem like you comprehended the points I made. And I responded, you give reasons why God is hiding. I accept those. I then say, no matter what are the reasons for God hiding, disbelief in goodwill exists. That is 4/5 of humanity. Unless you will claim all the disbelievers go to heaven, except 10 psychopaths, let's say, you have a problem. But before I demonstrate my argument, first let's respond to this nonsense, because, sorry to say, those were nonsense.
It's not as obvious, is because it's a test. It's about whether somebody's going to be sincere.
What is he testing exactly? Sincerity and moral character? Or gullibility? You don't need to answer. We have the answer from the religious distribution maps of this world. Allah is testing geography. Not sincerity, moral character, not even gullibility. And yet, if he made himself clear, he would have in fact tested people's character, following his moral instructions. If he had any, of course, because Allah only cares about adherence, not moral character.
2, it's soul building. It's a way of building your consciousness and your relationship with God.
Again, your answers are non-analytical nonsense. You imply the human struggle with life and you name that relationship with God. To have a relationship, the other person needs to be there, not to be absent. I mean, so, and some other thing. Muhammad that spoke with Allah, he didn't have any relationship. That is what you are claiming now. Muhammad didn't have a relationship with Allah.
God doesn't want necessarily you to be just somebody who acknowledges the truth, but wants to submit to it.
Meaningful submission comes through rationality and through the heart, not blind obedience. Moreover, the only thing he achieves is obedience through conquest. And that is undeniable, Sharif. So people believe in him because of conquest and indoctrination. So he replaces conviction through rationality with conviction because of conquest and indoctrination. That is what he does, Sharif. And mind you guys, all these are irrelevant because then I will present my argument. And all these, either way, are irrelevant. But we are having fun entertaining this nonsense.
And maybe this is the best way to develop the idea of submission, because he has to test himself, test his ideas, and be sincere to it. 3.
Submission or blind submission? Yeah? There is a difference there. Sharif, what you are describing is gullibility, has nothing to do with morality. So if a person is smart and understands your arguments, then that means he is good. Or if a person is dumb, like me, I don't understand your arguments because I am dumb. That means I am a bad person. No, nothing to do with morality, my friend. So the submission you are boasting, oh, submission, is useless. What is submission? It addresses gullibility, intelligence, naivete, has nothing to do with morality, my friend. So if you believe the Bigfoot exists, you are moral? No, nothing to do.
That the most number of people that will enter into submission of God are the ones who have to go through this process. So it has to be set up in a particular way in which people have to, rigorously test their ideas and come to this conclusion.
Yet the religious maps of this world, undeniable hard evidence, in other words, Sharif, contradicts your narrative. People are not becoming Muslims or Christians or atheists because they test, their ideas, they have a pure heart. No, it's all about conquest, indoctrination, nothing to do. Okay, maybe to few people, they think, and even those, my friend, there is no free will. Okay, even these people, again, has nothing to do with the things you are saying. And I won't even go to your scriptures with hard determinism and Allah guides whoever he wills and all this kind of things. Okay, so you say abstract nonsense, logical things you find in your mind that don't relate to a rigorous investigation of hard evidence, statistical evidence, not even to your scriptures, my friend. What you are saying now don't even relate to your own scriptures.
And maybe that's what God wants. 4, actually, there are sufficient evidences and reasons for the existence of God, which are manifest and are clear-cut and are open to every single individual.
No, there aren't according to the religious distribution maps of this world. No, there aren't. According to hard, undeniable evidence. Moreover, now you are denying that God is hiding. You don't believe in God hiddenness, after all. Are there evidence or God is hiding? What of the two you will argue for? You cannot argue for both things. Anyway, so now let's go to my argument. Even if I accept all the nonsense you said, let's say I accept all the nonsense you said. Premise 1, Allah is just. Premise 2, Allah decides to hide. Premise 3, there is disbelief in goodwill. Premise 4, God condemns people based on disbelief. Conclusion, Allah is not just. The end. Even if I accept everything you said. So when you laugh and you say you didn't listen to the vid, what part of my argument has anything to do with your video? Which one of my premises your video rejects? None. Completely irrelevant. So, lol, No, I can lol back now. Thank you very much. But guys, although it's over 20 minutes, let me explain my argument and why it's conclusively disproves Allah. Allah is just, okay? Allah decides to hide. With this action he makes, hiding, people disbelieve in goodwill. In other words, the majority of Christians honestly don't believe in Islam. I honestly don't believe in Islam. I don't have bad intentions. I don't have malicious intent when I don't believe in Islam. I just don't believe. So I disbelieve with goodwill. Yet, let's see how morality works. Let's say I see a person drowning and I have the will to save him. And I run into the sea, and because I'm an idiot, I accidentally drown him. Am I evil? No, because my intent was good. I had goodwill. The same way, no matter what are the reasons that God hides, the fact still remains that he hides. And still people with goodwill disbelieve in Allah. So how then can Allah punish those people? When they have goodwill, they are good people, in other words. Okay, that's how the argument goes. And I challenge anyone who sees this video to defeat this argument. And I will post his attempt or answer or whatever, his argument in my next video. Whoever sees this video, send me a message on Twitter with your answer.